I want to talk about a really important subject, and that is boundaries. So many amazing women that I work with are, doing very well in their careers. They might be mothers, running their own businesses, but a really common theme is stress that they're living with because they're actually not respecting themselves enough and not taking the time to really clearly look at where the boundaries are in different areas of their lives. And without that, you feel an element of feeling disempowered, a little bit out of control in some circumstances and experiences. Parents definitely that don't have boundaries set experience that. And I know I've raised 4. And 3 of them were on my own for a long time. And, boundaries at work, it's one of the greatest signs of self-respect and self-care that you can have. People are stressed at work because they're not clearly defining for themselves where their boundaries are. And therefore, they can go into work environments where they feel bulldozed or bullied, whatever it might be. When you know where your boundaries are clearly defined, you can communicate a whole lot better. You communicate with a sense of certainty, of calmness, but also authority. And not authority over others, but the authority over self and your life and your decisions. And there's always this underlying fear for people to not set their boundaries. But in not setting them, there's a level of stress, frustration, anger, disempowerment. And if that's you, I invite you to look at all the different areas of your life. So an example is boundaries with your children. And as circumstances change, you need to come back and revisit where your boundaries are set. So you don't just set them once and on you go in life, because life is forever changing and evolving in circumstance. So you need to revisit, and you'll know when you need to revisit because you're feeling the disempowerment, the stress, the loss of control, feeling that someone else or something else has more power over you than you have over yourself and your life. So parents, for example, get incredibly stressed and let their children push their buttons. Been there, done that. And it's very frustrating and it's exhausting because they don't have the boundaries set on what is an acceptable behaviour, what is not an acceptable behaviour, and what will the consequences be. When you're clearly defined on that and you're willing to follow through, because there's no point setting a boundary here and not actioning it, speaking it, applying it. That's just a thought of your boundary. But when you're really, really clear, then you can communicate to your children in an empowered, authoritative way. And if they come back and push, you are still so clear on what that boundary is, and eventually that game stops. But you have to hold firm. You have to be willing to follow through. So there are also individuals in work environments. And if you don't have a boundary set, so here's an example. I've experienced bullying in the workplace in my past. And it can be very, very distressing. And I had a boundary set at one stage where I was the 2IC and my manager would not let me address the team that were bullying me. But I was so clear on my boundaries that with no threat, with absolute certainty, I was able to sit down and speak to my manager and say, I will not tolerate this. There was my line in the sand. There was my boundary. I will not tolerate being treated like this. I do not deserve to be treated as such. And if you will not allow me to speak to the group and have the opportunity to put a stop to this, then I'm going to need to find another job. Because I spoke clearly, no threats, nothing. I just said for my own well-being, because this is a boundary for me. I was then given the opportunity to address the group. And again, I was able to address the group with great honesty and in asking them to be accountable. Heads at the end of that conversation were hanging in shame. And then we created a much more functioning, high-functioning team. Because I hadn't berated them. I had just clearly defined that it was behaviours that I wasn't going to accept, and that I was giving them an opportunity to explain to me why they felt I deserved that kind of behaviour, how they feel about treating me with that kind of behaviour. And again, there was a little bit of emotion for me because they could see it's hurtful. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't aggressive. I was holding my own space of authority because I was prepared to say, this is the kind of team that I will function and work with. And if you're not prepared to be accountable for how you speak to me, how you treat to me, and give me a reason why, then I will leave the meeting and I will never return to the workplace again. See, when you speak from authority, and the authority comes because I know in my life what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Another example is when I've been in another role, and there was similar role in every single state, and more pressure was being put on, and the other team members that did not have clearly set boundaries because they were living from fear of losing their job and fear of saying no. Now, there's a big one. The inability to say no, and not even looking to visit what their boundaries are until I started having conversations with them and questioning them on it. They were working incredibly long hours. They'd been employed from a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Some of them were then encroaching in onto their Saturdays and doing half-day Sundays. Now, I was prepared to give some extra because that's part of the role, but I clearly defined how much extra I would give, and that the value of my life and my well-being and my time with my family, my friends, and for myself to rejuvenate so I could face the Monday and do the large tasks at hand. Far more important to me than a job. Yes, did I need the money? Absolutely. But I need my self-respect first. I need to feel that I am the captain of my own vessel within my life. Because the compromise is too big. The compromise is way too big. I was watching these other people become unwell, physically unwell, starting to suffer anxiety, unable to sleep in the early hours of the morning. Now, is there any way to live life? I don't think so. That's not a quality of life. They were handing their power over to a job, to others. Not me. I clearly defined my boundaries. And at one point, when I was starting to lapse in my boundaries, I too was starting to wake in the early hours of the morning. And guess what? That was a message to me that I needed to revisit and reset the boundaries. Because I am the most important relationship I will ever have. You are the most important relationship, the most, that you will ever have. And you only get one crack at this life, so you may as well live it fully. And again, remember, when your boundaries are clearly set, you can communicate from an empowered place. Not from anger, not from stress, not from fear. In fact, one of the people in one of the other states hadn't even taken a holiday for over 2 years, fearing that the job they'd come back to would be way too big. And in the end, they were having an emotional breakdown. And as soon as I started to speak to these others and educate them and help them to see and set, and the importance of them setting their boundaries, guess what? Holidays were taken, things were still get done. They asked for help. Well, who was going to cover this and who was going to cover that while they were off? Stopped doing those hours on the Sunday, because guess what? You need to live with your self-respect. And then I too was asked, and I was able to say, yeah, it's a big job. And I'm prepared to put in this much extra time, but I'm not prepared to put in as much as what the others are doing. That it was a wonderful job. It was a great job. But it was growing and growing and growing, and with it, so were the responsibilities. And I just clearly let them know that I'm not putting in all this extra time on weekends. I'll put in some time, and most evenings were limited because I had other things going on in my life. And that I would give the job 100%, but whatever couldn't be done, I would add to the next day. Whatever couldn't be done, I'd add to the next day. Whatever couldn't be done, I'd add to the next day. And the interesting thing is, when you set your boundaries, when they are clearly defined, and communicated, you have more energy. Therefore, you also have more productivity. It's a fascinating thing. When you're living in distress, under stress, with levels of anxiousness, anger, fear, it robs you of your fuel. Robs you of your fuel. And the more you drain the fuel, just like a car, you will eventually stop. And they're the warning signs, again, with those that were unable to sleep, those that were getting very bad health issues, ongoing health issues. Clearly defined boundaries, valuing yourself, getting really clear on what those boundaries are, and communicating that from your place of truth, not fear. Because you know what, you can go find another job and you'll probably end up in the same situation, because life is telling you to respect yourself enough to get clear on your boundaries and communicate them. Same within relationships. What will you accept and what will you not? What time are you willing to give? So the same thing, you know, I give my husband focused one-on-one time. And then there are times where we also need time to ourselves. Or we need time. Part of our boundaries being set is we have one-on-one time with our adult children as well. We take them on dates. We do family events, but also individually, because that's part of our value system. So these are non-negotiables. In my business, I'm very clear on how much time I give to my coaching business, that I have my boundaries set on time that I can give to family, to my husband, to friendships with my husband, and individually catching up with my girlfriends, him catching up with his mates. Grandchildren, clearly defined time with friends. And the way that we ensure that those boundaries are met, that we have that life that we so desire, means that we book in times. Because I'll tell you now, times and dates can be moved. So that's a boundary that we have. It's very clearly defined. We will lock in times and dates with friends, with family, for ourselves, and those can be moved, but all they're doing is being moved. If they're not set, if they're not locked in, if we don't have that boundary clearly defined, guess what? Time just gets away from you, and you can go through a year or 8 months and you haven't caught up with certain people that you love and treasure and enjoy time with. Boundaries set around money, finances, according to your values and your needs. So you might choose within a relationship to have individual bank accounts, and then perhaps so you have that independence. Remember, boundaries are set around what works for you. And maybe you own a home or you're renting or something, and you have a joint account that you feed funds into. Great way to stop arguments around finances and who's doing what and who's got what, and that way I don't care what my husband spends his money on from his bank account. He doesn't care what I spend my money on, and we have our joint bank account, and we've taught that to our children as well. So very, very, very clearly defined boundaries. Clearly defined boundaries that if my husband's spending, his own money for certain things, then hey, then it's my turn. I'll input as well. It might be dinners out and things like that. And there's just that boundary set, within each of us, that if one person is starting to contribute in one particular way, then hey, my shout next time, my turn next time, my giving next time. I've got boundaries around my health and well-being. I pay a personal trainer twice a week to ensure that I am at the gym keeping strong. I always joke with people, I'll probably be the 90-year-old woman still having a personal trainer, because it serves me. It's a boundary that I have set and I adhere to. It's part of my highest value that as I age, that I stay strong. To ensure that I do that, I pay somebody to support me in that, because I have to show up. You can have boundaries around your foods, etc. And boundaries within how you will allow other people to treat you. And remember, you'll know if you don't have your boundaries set, because you won't be clearly communicating them. You won't be communicating, you won't be taking a stance from your personal empowerment, your personal inner leadership. Because personal leadership comes from the inside out. Hence my business name, Inner Expressions. So sit down, map out all the different areas within your life, whether it's with children, within a relationship, within your business, or within your job. whatever areas you feel are stressful, have a sense of being out of control, and you feel disempowered, angry, fearful, and confront those feelings. Clearly define your boundaries and then communicate them from that strength. It's so important that you value yourself that much. It's also important that you value other people around you. Because again, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again, when your boundaries are clearly defined and you've taken ownership of them, you will communicate to people with a level of authority over yourself and your own life, and respect. Regardless of how others may be treating you, you will be addressing them with respect and a calmness. There's a calmness that comes when you step into actioning this element of your personal leadership. And I know that I deserve that. Do you know that you deserve that? That's the powerful question.